If you're over 60 and you still have belly fat that just won't budge no matter how little you eat, no matter how much you walk, I want you to watch this entire video before you do anything else today, because the problem is almost certainly not what you think it is. It is not your willpower. It is not your metabolism being too far gone, and it is almost definitely not that you need to eat less. Here's what almost no one tells you. The belly fat that sits around your organs, what doctors call visceral fat, behaves completely differently after age 60 than it did when you were 40, and the strategies that used to work. They either work far less effectively, or in some cases, they actually make the problem worse. After more than 2 decades working with older adults in clinical medicine, I've seen this pattern repeat itself hundreds of times. A woman in her late 60s, careful about what she eats, still carrying dangerous fat around her midsection. A man in his 70s, walking every day, and yet his visceral fat keeps climbing on every scan. They are doing the right things, but they are missing one critical piece. And that piece is what you eat, and when you eat it right before bed. Tonight specifically matters more than most people realize. Stay with me, because what I'm about to share in this video goes against almost everything you've been told about eating at night, and it may be the single most important shift you can make right now to start protecting yourself from the most dangerous kind of fat in the human body. My name is Dr. William, and for over 20 years I've worked with older adults patients in their 60s, 70 seconds, and 80 seconds, helping them navigate some of the most common and misunderstood health challenges that come with aging. Belly fat is one of the topics I get asked about the most, and what frustrates me is how much misinformation surrounds it. Here is the first thing I want you to understand. Not all fat is the same. The fat you can pinch on your arm or your thigh, that's subcutaneous fat. It sits under your skin. It might be cosmetically frustrating, but it's not your most dangerous health threat. Visceral fat is different. Visceral fat sits deep inside your abdominal cavity. It wraps itself around your liver, your kidneys, your intestines, your pancreas. You cannot see it from the outside. You cannot always feel it. But it is one of the most metabolically active and destructive things that can happen inside an aging body. Why? Because visceral fat doesn't just sit there. It releases inflammatory chemicals called cytokines directly into your bloodstream. It disrupts insulin signaling. It raises your cortisol levels. It puts enormous strain on your cardiovascular system and your liver. And after the age of 60, when your hormonal environment has already shifted, visceral fat becomes increasingly stubborn and increasingly dangerous. Research published in the journal Obesity has linked high visceral fat to elevated risk of type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cognitive decline, and even some cancers, all conditions that disproportionately affect adults in their 60s and beyond. Here's the part most doctors don't have time to explain in a 12-minute office visit. What you eat in the hours before sleep has an outsized effect on whether your body stores fat that night or begins to process and reduce it. Most people either skip eating at night entirely, afraid that eating will cause weight gain, or they reach for something that actually accelerates visceral fat storage without realizing it. Both of those are mistakes, and the solution is simpler and more specific than most people expect. Before I tell you what the #1 bedtime food is, I want to hear from you. Drop your age in the comments below. If you're 60, 65, 70, 75, 80, or beyond, I want to see it. This video was built specifically for you, and knowing who's watching helps me keep making content that actually matters for this stage of life. And if no one has told you that your nighttime eating habits are directly affecting your visceral fat, that is exactly why this channel exists. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do that now so you never miss information like this. Let's get into it. Let me explain something that most nutrition advice completely ignores when it applies to older adults. When you are younger, your body has a natural window of metabolic flexibility. Even if you eat the wrong things at the wrong time, your hormones, particularly human growth hormone, testosterone, and estrogen, help regulate fat storage during sleep. They help your body repair itself, burn stored energy, and maintain lean muscle tissue. Overnight, after 60, that hormonal landscape changes dramatically. Growth hormone production drops. For women, estrogen, which actively protects against visceral fat accumulation, is gone or dramatically reduced after menopause. For men, testosterone levels decline steadily, and that loss is directly tied to increased belly fat storage. What this means is that the same nighttime habits that were relatively harmless at 45 become genuinely problematic at 65 or 70. Your body is now more vulnerable during those sleeping hours, and the wrong bedtime choices don't just cause minor fat gain, they feed the visceral fat cycle directly. Here's what happens in a typical night for many adults over 60. They eat dinner at 6 or p.m. By p.m., blood sugar has dropped not dangerously low, but low enough that the body sends hunger signals. Many people ignore this entirely, go to bed slightly hungry, and experience elevated cortisol overnight as the body tries to maintain blood sugar levels. Cortisol, your stress hormone, is one of the primary drivers of visceral fat accumulation. So ironically, going to bed completely empty may be contributing to the very fat you're trying to lose. Others reach for a snack, crackers, a bowl of cereal, a piece of toast, maybe some fruit juice. These are high glycemic choices that spike blood sugar right before sleep, trigger an insulin response, and when the body cannot burn that glucose during sleep, it converts it directly into fat, specifically the kind stored viscerally. So you are caught between two bad options: go to bed hungry and raise cortisol, or eat the wrong thing and spike insulin. Both pathways lead to more visceral fat. There is a third option, and that is choosing the right food, one specific food that threads the needle perfectly. This is the part most people never hear. The number one bedtime food for reducing visceral fat in adults over 60 is not a fruit, not a vegetable, and it is not some exotic supplement or powder you've never heard of. It is cottage cheese, specifically plain, full-fat or low-fat cottage cheese eaten in a small portion around 30 to 45 minutes before sleep. Now, before you click away, let me explain exactly what is happening inside your body when you do this, because the mechanism is fascinating and the science is actually quite compelling. Cottage cheese is extraordinarily high in a specific protein called casein. Casein is what scientists call a slow-digesting protein. Unlike whey protein, which floods your bloodstream quickly, casein protein releases amino acids steadily and gradually over the course of 5 to 7 hours. In simple terms, think of it like a slow-burning log on a fire. It keeps the fire going through the night without creating a sudden flare or spike. What does this do? First, it prevents that overnight cortisol spike I just mentioned. When your body has a steady, gentle supply of amino acids and enough fuel, it does not need to sound the alarm. Cortisol stays lower, and lower cortisol overnight is one of the most powerful things you can do to protect against visceral fat accumulation. Second, casein protein actively supports muscle protein synthesis during sleep. This matters enormously for people over 60. As we age, a process called sarcopenia, the progressive loss of muscle mass, accelerates significantly. And here is something that most people do not realize. Muscle and visceral fat have an inverse relationship. The more lean muscle tissue your body maintains, the more metabolically active you are even at rest. Muscle burns more calories than fat tissue even when you are sleeping. So supporting muscle through the night is directly connected to reducing fat, especially visceral fat. A landmark study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition looked at elderly men and women who consumed casein protein before bed versus a placebo. The group consuming casein showed significantly greater overnight muscle protein synthesis, meaning their bodies were actively maintaining lean tissue while they slept. Over time, that translates directly into a more favorable body composition, less fat, more functional muscle. Third, cottage cheese is relatively low in sugar, which means it does not trigger the insulin spike I described earlier. When you eat a bowl of cereal or crackers before bed, insulin shoots up, glucose gets stored as fat, and your body enters a fat storage mode overnight. Cottage cheese keeps insulin stable. That matters enormously after 60. And fourth, and this is the part that surprises people most, full-fat cottage cheese contains a small but meaningful amount of conjugated linoleic acid, or CLA. CLA is a naturally occurring fatty acid found in dairy from grass-fed animals that has been studied specifically for its ability to reduce visceral fat deposition. The amounts in a single serving are modest, but over weeks and months, the cumulative effect is measurable. Margaret was 74 years old when she first came to see me. She was eating carefully, mostly vegetables, lean meats, very few sweets. She walked 30 minutes every day, but her waist circumference kept growing, her blood pressure was creeping up, and her last scan showed significant visceral fat accumulation around her liver. She was frustrated. She felt like her body had become her enemy. One of the first things I asked her was what she ate in the evenings. She told me she stopped eating after p.m. completely because she had heard that eating at night causes weight gain. By 10 or p.m., when she tried to sleep, she was often restless, slightly uncomfortable, and her sleep quality was poor. I explained to her exactly what I just explained to you: the cortisol connection, the overnight protein synthesis window, the difference between the wrong bedtime food and the right one. She started eating a small bowl of plain cottage cheese, about half a cup around p.m. each night. Nothing else, no crackers, no added sugar. Sometimes a small sprinkle of cinnamon, which has its own blood sugar benefits, we can talk about another time. Within 6 weeks, she told me her sleep had improved noticeably. Within 3 months, her fasting blood sugar had dropped slightly, her waist had decreased by almost 2 inches, and she reported feeling more energetic in the mornings. Was it only the cottage cheese? No, Margaret also made a few other adjustments we talked about, but the bedtime change was the anchor. It changed what was happening in her body during the hours when most people assume nothing important is going on. Let me give you the practical details, because the how matters just as much as the what. The serving size that appears most effective, based on research, is between 100 and 150 grams of cottage cheese, roughly half a cup to 2/3 of a cup. This provides approximately 12 to 20 grams of protein, which is enough to sustain meaningful overnight muscle synthesis and keep cortisol from rising without being heavy enough to disrupt sleep. Eat it 30 to 45 minutes before you go to bed, not 2 hours before bed at dinner. That is too early for the overnight window. Not right as you are turning out the lights. Give your digestive system a few minutes to begin processing. What type of cottage cheese? For most adults over 60, I recommend plain, low-fat cottage cheese as the first choice, or full fat if you have no cardiovascular concerns and prefer the taste. The key word is plain. Flavored cottage cheese often contains added sugar, which brings back the insulin problem you are trying to avoid. Check the label. If sugar is listed in the first few ingredients, choose a different brand. Can you add anything to it? Yes, and there are a few additions that can actually enhance the fat reduction effect. A light sprinkle of cinnamon is excellent. Cinnamon has been studied for its ability to improve insulin sensitivity overnight, particularly in adults with early blood sugar irregularities. It adds flavor without sugar and may amplify the metabolic benefit. A small handful of walnuts, 4 to 5 walnuts maximum, adds a healthy omega-3 fat component that supports anti-inflammatory pathways overnight.